So this is it. This is the review of HSK 3. There, I believe, are 73 grammar points that we've worked through. Let me check here. In 40 videos, it's 73. So I'm going to go through them really quickly. I'm not going to give an example for the majority of them. I'm just going to kind of state what the point was. And then if that doesn't ring a bell to you, it would probably be a good idea for you to go back and refresh on that point. So that's really what I'm doing with this review. It's not to give a lot of detail. It's just to kind of say, this is what we learned. We learned how to do this. And hopefully you'll be like, oh yeah, I have a sense of what that was. Or maybe you'll be like, oh, I need to review. I also want to just say, hey, thanks for walking with me through this course. It was HSK 1, 2, and 3. Of course, it's the old HSK 1, 2, and 3. There are new standards now with, I believe, 9 different levels. And so 1, 2, and 3 would be a little bit different. But here we are. We did HSK 1, 2, and 3. And you have walked with me point by point through this thing. And so thank you. Thank you for doing that. I hope it was helpful to you. And I hope that you laughed every once in a while at my corny jokes, and I hope you learned a lot too, and you felt encouraged along the way. So let's just jump into it. The first point was we learned how to estimate by putting 2 numbers in a row, like 我要3、4个. I went 3 or 4, 3 to 4. 我要3、4个. We talked about big numbers, how there's increments of 4. So instead of it being, digits, tens, hundreds, and then thousand, and then 10,000, and million. So in Chinese, there's a 10,000 unit, and then it goes from there, and there's a 100,000 unit called yi, and so they don't use the word million. They don't have that unit. They have that e, that 1 and e units, and so that's just different. We learned about ban, to say half of something and a number and a half. So 半个东西 is half a thing. 一个半东西 is 1.5 things. We talked about how to talk about duration using la. Especially if you're talking about duration in the past, it's using la. If we're talking about making that sense of duration ongoing, it happened and it's continuing to happen, you put another la at the end of the sentence. So and duration in the negative, it goes in a different spot. Talking about duration, how long something happened, it's something like 我看了2个小时书. I read 2 hours book. I read a book for 2 hours. But if you say I didn't do something for as long, then it's like 我好几年没吃猪肉了. I haven't eaten pork for many years now. We talked about a ba structure. I can't go into that. That's way too much. We talked about a bei structure, which is a passive. We did a little review about when time phrases go. So the answering the question, when something happened, where does that go? It can go before the subject, right after, between the subject and verb. We talked about 以前, 以后, and 的时候. We talked about 时 being a shortened form of 时候, 的时候, actually. We talked about 刚才, meaning moments ago or just now. We talked about 又, meaning again in the past. We talked about 一边, meaning 一边, one thing was happening, and 一边, another thing was happening. 2 actions happening simultaneously at the same time. We talked about 先 and 在, to sequence events. First this event and then that event, whether it's no matter whether it's present, past, or future. We talked about 后来, to say afterwards. At some point, something happened, and then afterwards, at some point after that event, something else happened. When you're sequencing 2 past events, you can say one thing happened, 后来, another thing happened. We talked about 终于, to mean finally. So like 你终于到了, you finally arrived. We talked about 总是, to mean always. Something always happens. 总是 is the most like the English word always. We talked about 老是 or 老 to say always in an annoyed tone. Like you might say if you're having a fight with your spouse, you always do that thing that you do and it annoys me. We talked about 一直, meaning it's also like always, but it's more of like an all along or continuously kind of thing. We talked about 还是, meaning or, to ask a question. Do you want this or that? Which we just went over, I think, in the last video. We also talked about 或者. It also means or, but it's more presenting options. This or that are both great. We talked about 那么 or 那 to say then or in that case. So it's like, so do you want to go, or like I'm hungry. And then someone might respond, so why don't we go eat? That so is na or nama. We talked about 跟 to mean with. It's a preposition meaning with. 我跟你说一件事. I'm going to talk about something with you. We talked about 只 to mean only or just, like only this much, or I just ate meat. I didn't eat any vegetables. Just. We talked about an adjective plus 极了 to mean extremely. If you want to say 好吃极了, it was so yummy. 好吃极了. We talked about 多 before an adjective, like 多好吃, also meaning extremely. Like it's kind of like saying how yummy, although it doesn't have that super formal feel in English as it does in Chinese. We talked about 比较 before adjectives, meaning relatively, comparatively, rather, quite. It means to compare, but before an adjective, it makes that into like a relatively, it's relatively cold today. It's not extremely cold, it's relatively cold. We talked about 这么 or 那么 before adjectives to say, it's a kind of like talks about a degree, like this cold. Oh, 今天这么冷. Today it's this cold. Or that, that big. 那么大. We talked about several different uses of the word 才. It can mean only, like as in a small number. My daughter's only 5 years old. It can be put in the sentence to say only after or not until, like 5 years passed before she finally learned to tie her shoes. So that kind of, in English I said before, that's kind of like 才, or actually it's more of the next, that one's more like expressing lateness or slowness. It'd be like she had to study before. Anyway, you get the idea. They're actually kind of related. We talked about comparisons. 一样 meaning same. Two things are the same. Or we can say 一样 adjective, like 我和你一样高. We are the same height. We talked about 有 to say as, like 我有你高吗? Am I as tall as you? Do I have as much height as you do? We talked about 跟 something 比 or 比起来. So 跟 T-Rex 比起来, 我一点都不高. Compared to T-Rexes, I am not even a little tall. We talked about 看起来 or 看起来像. 看起来 means looks like. 看起来像 means, or looks, maybe you look tired. 你看起来很累. Or你看起来像大象. You look like an elephant. 你看起来像大象. And I don't know why I came up with that, but hey, I'm working on examples on the fly here, so you gotta forgive me. We talked about 没办法 to mean that something isn't possible, or something doesn't feel possible, or I had no choice. So 我没办法吃饭. There's no way I can eat, because I didn't have time. 我没办法吃饭，没有时间. We talked about 关于 meaning about. So like, 我想看关于大象的书. I want to read a book about elephants. 我想看 about elephants the book. Yeah. For example, or you can say 关于这个事情, about this thing, blah, 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 blah. We talked about result complements. So result complements are a verb plus some kind of complement that comes after it to tell what the result was. 洗干净 means to wash clean. Not just wash, but to wash with the result of being clean. 洗干净了. To negate that, it's may or 没有, because it didn't happen. If you put a de or a bu between the verb and that kind of complement or directional complement, it'll make that into a potential complement, meaning something can happen or something cannot happen. So that's a really flexible way to make basically many kind of complements. The kind of complements that it's a verb plus some sort of result or a verb plus some sort of direction. Any of those can become potential complements by putting a de between the verb and its complement or a bu. So there you go. We talked about simple directional complements, meaning verb plus lai or verb plus chu. So we have a verb, and then the lai or chu will tell you whether it's coming toward the speaker or away from the speaker. We talked about compound directional complements. There are verbs plus special motion verbs plus lai or chu. So that special motion verb and lai or chu together is a compound directional complement. So if I want to say 走上来, 走 means to walk, 上来 means to, 上 is that motion verb of going up, or not necessarily going, but moving up. And then the lai or chu will say whether it's coming up or going up. If you're down here, you want to walk up. So there we go. We talked about de, which is the third de, to make an adjective into an adverb. If I say 快快地走, that means fast de 走, and so that 快 is normally an adjective has now become an adverb, and it goes in the adverb section of a sentence, which is after the subject and before the verb. And so you can make any adjective essentially, any adjective into an adverb by putting that other kind of, that third de after it and plugging it into that spot. And that de works very much like the English ly, as in happy is an adjective, happily is an adverb. We compared the three does. So the first de that we learned is about making something into an adjective and or a possessive. And then we talked about the de that makes something into a complement, either a potential complement or a degree complement. Degree complement was from HSK 2. And also the last de, which makes things into adverbs. We talked about reduplication of adjectives. So this little thing where you can take an adjective and reduplicate it and put a de at the end. Like 高高的, he's tall. So it enhances the descriptive feeling of the adjective. Excuse me. If I say 高高的胖胖的, tall and fat or stocky. We talked about 很 coming before certain kinds of verbs. So in English, we can't say, I very like you. You can say, I really like you, but you can't say, I very like you. In Chinese, you can say 很 before certain kinds of psychological verbs. And it's not really a profound point. It just is good to point out because we don't have, that exact equivalent in English where we can use very in that way. We talked about 除了 something 以外, and that's that outside of something, blah, 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 blah. And that's a little bit more of a complex lesson. And that one, I can imagine being a good one to review. We talked about, wow, I'm going to cough. Hopefully it's the last time. Here we go. Woo, baby. Okay, we talked about if. How to say if then. So with some kind of if clause and then 就 usually, or sometimes 那, or sometimes nothing. But there's 如果, there's 要是 that comes at the beginning of the if phrase. There's 的话 that could come at the end of the phrase with or without 如果 or 要是. So lots of options of how to say if then. It's a very flexible phrase. We talked about 不但而且. 不但而且. Remember that one? 不但, not only, but also. Not only, but also. We talked about 只要就. As long as, 只要, as long as that thing happens, only needs that. Only need this. 这个就可以发生. So 只要 only need that, and boom, we got that. We had 只有才. Only in the event that this happens can this happen. 只有才. Then we talked about 应该, which means should. Remember, that one's a little funny when you negate it. You have to be careful because 不应该 means that something ought not to happen, but 应该不 means something will not likely happen. We talked about 难 before a verb, which is the equivalent of 好 before a verb, and it means difficult to do. 好 means easy to do. Did I say equivalent? I mean opposite of? Something like that. So like 这个难扔, it's difficult to throw. What would be difficult to throw? A house? A house would be difficult to throw. Houses are truly difficult to throw. But you have to be careful because 难 and 好 before certain sense verbs like 吃, smell, 闻, or 喝, drink, it doesn't mean good or it doesn't mean difficult or easy. It means like good or bad. Like 难吃 would be not tasty. So you have to be careful about how that. We talked about 有 and 有. So 有 adjective 有 它有 all I can think of is 又高又帅. So I guess I'll do that. Go back to that one. It's 又高, tall and handsome. 又高又帅. We talked about 直到, all the way until, straight until. 直到12点半我才做完作业. That's from All Set Learning. All the way until 12:30, I finally finished my homework. So 直到12点半我才做完作业. Or 直到电影结束他都没来. All the way until the end of the movie, he still didn't come. 他都没来. That's also from All Set Learning. We talked about causative verbs. 让, 使, 叫, 请, 要. That's a causative verb is when you're like, I had somebody do something. And there's different kinds of causative verbs that, those 5. We talked about 向 as a preposition, meaning toward or sometimes from in certain cases. We talked about 经过, that means pass by, or if you're talking about the way something was accomplished, then it can mean through, like through hard effort or through study or through, through learning or whatever. We talked about 越, so it means the more. 我越吃越胖. The more I eat, the fatter I get. We also talked about 越来越, so that means more and more something. Like I don't know, I'm on tall and fat. So 我越来越胖了. 我越来越胖了. I'm fatter and fatter. We talked about how to say not even one. So if I wanted to say 一个人都没有向我打招呼. Oh, I threw in 向 there for a nice, that means toward. Okay. So 一个人, one person, 都没有, all did not say hi to me. 一个人都没有向我打招呼. We talked about this idea of you want to do what, 就 do what. So,你想吃就吃. You want to eat 就吃. We talked about like if 你想吃什么就吃什么. You want to eat what 就 eat what. And that means like eat whatever you want. And you can put any question word into that kind of idea. You want to go when? Then go when. You want to go for how long? Then go for how long. So go for however long you want. We talked about how it's a broader concept of if you take two question words and you put them in those two phrases side by side, it means like whatever or whatever or for however long and that kind of. You don't necessarily even have to have the 就 or want and 就. You can sometimes just side by side they mean that. We talked about using question words to say any, something, all. Like, let's talk about any time. So, 什么时候去都可以. Whatever time, anytime, 都 is good. 什么时候去. So any question word can mean like any of that thing is all good. So it's question word, 都 something. We talked about how question words can mean somewhere, someone, something, or sometime. And it will be the same grammar as an actual question, but because of tone of voice and context, we'll know the person's not asking a question. They mean that question word actually means sometime, something, someone. So if it's someone, it would be 谁. If it's sometime, it would be 什么时候 or 几点. If it's somewhere, it would be 哪里 or 在哪里. We talked about 为了 meaning in order to or for the purpose of. We talked about using 这 and 是, two different ways to talk about location that we didn't know before. We call it alternate existential sentences. It's a beautiful term for something very easy, how to talk about location. And we talked about 有的 to mean a portion of the whole or some of something. And we compared 在 and 有. We compared 一点 and 有点. We compared 刚 and 刚才, 才 and 就, and 还是 and 或者. So there we had it. That was all of HSK 3. I really hope your Chinese has grown by walking with me through this HSK grammar course. I hope the exercises have helped you. And I hope that you will feel more accomplished and ready to go and be all that God has called you to be through this language. You take care. 再见.